Hello, this is Manager Dessouky. I'm a professor in the Daniel J. Epstein Department of Industrial and System Engineering here at the University of Southern California. With me is Professor Stan Suttles, also a professor in the same department. He recently just retired from the department in January 2015. And Stan is actually one of the few people in our profession who's held senior level positions both in industry, government, and academia. And for the next hour or so, we'll have a chance to chat about his experience in the industrial engineering operations research profession. And like most of us, we really didn't learn much about industrial engineering or operations research in our formative years in high school or even younger than that. And we could begin by seeing what your experiences at that early age, if they had much of an impact or foretelling of your professional career in industrial engineering or operations research.
Yes, they did in a lot of ways that I didn't anticipate. Obviously, I didn't think, even in high school, I would have never guessed industrial engineering, management science, OR, whatever labels you want to put it in. But I was always interested in being an engineer, and it started really with automotive kinds of things. Clear as a very young guy growing up in Denver, we had a neighbor that had a 34 Ford Roadster with a V8, Ford flathead V8 in it in our garage. And it wasn't mine, but I worked with him on it quite a bit. So by the time I was about 12 years old, I could build that engine, a Ford flathead V8, very simple. I couldn't build it to the standards I would expect today, but I could do that, and it would run, and so on. So that got me interested in kind of the hands-on and the making things as a very young person. And a lot of people ask, well, your dad must have been quite handy, and you picked it up from him. Au contraire, three brothers all got involved in cars and hands-on kind of things like that. My dad was a quite good athlete. He was the pro level. He actually went to the training camp as a quarterback for the Chicago Bears and so on. So he was a great athlete. I never saw him with a tool in his hand. And so at a very young age, I was the oldest, so I became the home handyman. And that got me interested in the hands-on thing, but also how things worked. And so electricity, chemistry, and so on, even at a very young age, were interesting to me. And then as I got into high school, people say, what were your favorite courses there? Well, there were three, and they're kind of unusual combination. Geometry was probably my number one that I liked best. Even better than algebra. For some reason, it caught on. We had a textbook that we covered about half of it in the course. I did the whole thing. And so it was just getting into those proofs and so on was just fun. And then drafting course was one that most of the people that were the college-bound kind of courses didn't take the drafting course. I did, and really enjoyed it. I still can remember, for both of those, I can still remember the names of those teachers and so on, and remember incidents with them. And then chemistry was fun for me. And physics to a lesser extent, but chemistry. I said, that's what I want to do, get involved in chemistry, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. Well, so I had no idea, again, of our field as it developed, but I said, well, I want to get chemical engineering kind of thing. Well, the elite thing to do in Colorado at that point was to get admitted to the Colorado School of Mines, because you had to be at least in the top 5% of your class to even get in. And there were three of us out of our graduating class of 180-some that went to mines. And out of the three of us, two ended up with a PhD eventually. I didn't graduate from mines. I just went there 2 years, and then I got into chemistry at that level, and I said, this isn't fun. It was really petroleum refining was as close as they came to. It was all mineral engineering at that point. And that was before Woolsey was there, and it had more of the kind of flavor that we're talking about today. But as I got around that, I said, this isn't what I want to do. And I said, so again, the motorsports thing came out, and by that point, I'd gotten into that myself, and I had a dragster that I could race. Had an old V8 in it, and didn't go very fast, but I had fun with it. And
so these were the 2 years you were at Colorado School of Mines.
Colorado School of Mines,
and then chemistry. Not at that point realizing that's not something that really drives you.
This isn't what I want to do. It was really clear to me. I said, I find out more what they do, particularly with petroleum refining and what those places are like. I don't want to work in that kind of an environment. So I said, well, what do I want to do? Meanwhile, I got around the race car kinds of things, and actually there was a guy, a really unusual mentor in those days, a guy named Tommy Thompson, and that's how I got the Bonneville bug. He had a streamliner that raced on Bonneville salt flats, and he built it strictly from ground up himself in his basement garage there, right out of Denver. And so at 58, 9, and 60, I went to Bonneville with him. And in 1960, we put the engine from my dragster in there so we could run a different class. And I actually drove it then. And so that kind of stuck in my blood. And meanwhile, I hadn't graduated from college yet. I then went down, in the process, I went down to Laterno down in East Texas, now Laterno University. It didn't have that kind of label then. It wasn't even an accredited engineering school, but it had a degree in production technology, degree in making things. So that's what I said. That's what I want to do. Happened to know about it through my mother.
So is this a degree, as you would think, is the cross between industrial engineering and mechanical engineering, a production technology degree?
Yeah, it's really applied, more mechanical engineering than industrial engineering, but it is a blend of them, but it's very applied to say, okay, how do we make things? I had courses in advanced gear design, and design and manufacture. How do you make gears? How do you run machine tools? You had shops and really did hands-on things. Some of the guys got into welding and all. I didn't take the welding engineering class. I should have, but I didn't. And so that was what I went there for. It was to go for production engineering. I said, I got enthused about making parts, and it was a shop, a guy named John Vandermeer was a couple blocks from me there in Denver. And he was a high school classmate of mine, clear from first grade up through high school. We're quite close, and we're still close. But his dad had a neat shop behind their house, freestanding garage with a lot of machine tools in it and all. And that's when I got around. He and Tommy Thompson watched them making parts. That's what drove me to that kind of a degree. So I go down to Laterno and had my dragster along, and this wasn't exactly viewed as a proper way to enter this kind of Christian-oriented, very really Southern Baptist, very strict orientation. You show up with a dragster behind your pickup to go enroll. Boy, I was a suspicious character from day one. You can just read it on their expressions. Why did we let this guy in? So it was kind of a fun transition. I got into those courses, did fine. I was getting good grades in those. Then you had to take elective courses. The electives I happened to choose were industrial engineering. And I started those statistical process control and these kinds of things. And I wasn't working very hard in those courses, and I kept coming out being the top student. I said, I'm going to look into this. So I ended up, as a flaw in the catalog, I ended up getting both those degrees, production technology and industrial engineering, because I could count electives for one, and trade them off, and they said, well, you can't apply for both those degrees. And
so this is kind of like the old adage that you start liking the things that you're really good at.
Yeah.
And so it kind of spins. The better you get at it, the more you like it.
Yeah,
and
but
the more you like it, so it's kind of like this feedback loop.
Yeah, so this was well into my college experience. I even uncovered industrial engineering, and it just naturally drew me into it. But I ended up with both those degrees as a result, and won't tell you the long story there. There's a guy named Charlie Foley, who was the primary industrial engineering faculty member there. By the time I actually graduated, he was the provost for the school. So we got to know each other rather well. And they had a program there where you could actually work in the factory. They made earth moving equipment and that kind of thing, offshore drilling rigs, big, heavy equipment and all. And I was working in that factory, and they had a program that was alter day, as they call it. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you might work in the factory, go to school Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and then the next week it'd alter. And it was the university, or as we now call it, and the factory were owned by the same people, so it was really worked pretty well. So I was doing that, and then my senior year, the spring semester, I was out working in the factory, and I still remember the foreman came up and he says, they contacted me from the, I'll now use the word university, and somebody just quit as an instructor. And are you interested in doing it? They had drafting courses and all needed to be covered, and this person left. It was a really small school. I said, I think I'm your guy. And learned important lessons. I figured out right away that what I wanted to study wasn't doing what I call the lunchbox mentality of working in a factory, but it was how do you look at the higher level of it. So I still hadn't graduated. I'm taught drafting courses in my senior last semester, and then that summer I taught there. So and that was 1962. So
Did that, you think, was the beginning of your interest in teaching? Or,
Yes.
Or did that happen later?
no, that happened right then.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as I got into that, I said, I like this.
Mm-hmm.
And I look back at it and chuckle about some of the kinds of things. Drafting was fairly straightforward. I had to work the summer as a draftsman in Coors Porcelain, but I knew something about that, and I loved it in high school, so it fit rather naturally. But I was also teaching in the summer. I taught like an industrial management kind of course. Well, you can imagine as a graduating senior, you didn't understand too much of the realities of management, but got through, and that got me hooked on it. Well, also in my senior year, it was in the fall before that, this Charlie Foley, he was in a PhD program from Purdue. I don't think he ever graduated. It was all but dissertation, as the old expression goes. But he was really a mentor at that point. He asked me the question, have you ever thought about going to graduate school? I had a real long answer, and I said, no. I'm going to go to work. I'm married, and I need to make some money. He said, well, even though it was an unaccredited school, he had enough connections that I could get into either Purdue or Arizona State University. And so, meanwhile, my folks had moved from Denver to Phoenix. My wife was expecting a child, so where did she want to be? In West Lafayette, where it gets really cold, or in Phoenix, where it gets really hot, and where parents are, and she has some family. So that was a very simple decision. We went there we thought we'd be there maybe 5 years to finish up, get a PhD, and then go on and teach somewhere.
So you went straight to your graduate school right after undergraduate?
Yes.
Okay.
I did, but I did it in a different way, as it seems typical of my life. I needed to work. I didn't have any great financial support, so I had to work. At that time, there were only really two places you wanted to work in Phoenix, Motorola and what was then called Air Research, Garrett Air Research. Garrett called first, and they said had an opening as a design draftsman. Okay, hourly design draftsman, started on a drawing board. And I had the neat experience there of getting involved in a brand new product. I started in other things, but a brand new product came along. It was called a jet fuel starter, which is basically a full gas turbine engine about this long, weighed under 100 pounds, put out about 150 horsepower, and it would start the main engine on an aircraft. Right. So like a fighter aircraft, on a very little battery and starter and all, you could start this up on the same fuel. It could be anywhere in the world. Didn't need any other support to start it. And so I got to see that from the time it was on the drawing board to start with. And then there wasn't a group, as we call the project engineering, to work it. So I went and talked to one of the bosses. I said, well, this is now getting from the design stage into really the hardware and program management, as we'd call it. I said, would we consider let me move over with that? And so I did. So I was still very junior. But I was also going to school, so they knew I wasn't a dude that was going to sit there on the drawing board for long term.
So at this time, you worked for Garrett, which at that time was a pretty large engine manufacturer company. Would you say it was was it a Fortune 500 company at that time, or?
It was the Garrett Corporation. It probably wasn't at quite that level, but it was right below. It was a big company. Had two main locations. One was in Torrance and L.A., and then I'll talk about it later. But and Phoenix ended up being larger. But it ended up going into the engines, had auxiliary power units that like to provide the power when you're in an aircraft. You have air conditioning and that kind of thing. That's usually an auxiliary power unit that does that, at least at the start of it. So we made those. We also made the starters that start the main engine. They're air driven. So I was in that group. But then this one product though was just really unique, and it gave me an experience. I could understand. I couldn't necessarily design the whole thing, but I could understand pretty well what everything did in that engine. Down to you have compressors and turbines, and you do a mapping down there. You get on a dyno and you map them so that they'll match right and not surge and all this kind of thing. So I got really involved in the bowels of how an engine works.
So what was your title at that time? Was it, you mentioned draftsman? Was your title?
Oh no, I'd moved from that. I was now in. I forget what the actual title was. Assistant.
Some kind of production engineering title on that level.
Project engineering.
Project engineering.
Yeah, and the titles didn't mean much.
Yeah, certainly.
One of the fun things, I had IE degrees and so on undergrad, and I was working on a master's in industrial engineering, and I heard two guys one night debating: is he an industrial or is he a aerospace engineer or mechanical engineer? Because these are mechanical products,
right?
Aerospace
Space industry.
They were debating which I was. I never said anything, and because just assume those were my instincts was always towards mechanical products, and I was really at home in that company. So that was a neat experience. Then,
so in this stage of your career, you were basically applying industrial engineering techniques and getting an advanced degree in industrial engineering techniques. Could you elaborate more on some of the IE techniques you were using in your job?
well, yeah, using the logic of it more than the actual application of what we'd call OR kind of tools. You're using that logic you learned about how you optimize things and so on. But there was really a disconnect in a lot of ways, and it really gets into what my experience was at ASU. I had two professors, I co-professor of my PhD program. One was Charlie Hoyt, who had graduated from Purdue, and he did his PhD when he was about 51 years old. He graduated, and he'd had his own screw machine factory for about 27 years before going back to school. So he was really the hands-on practical management guy, enthusiastic. The other one, you and I, a very common tie there, Alan Pritzker, was probably the leading researcher in industrial engineering in the country and maybe in the world. So the two of them were an interesting contrast, trying to satisfy both them, and it turned out really being a blessing because it forced me to develop some rigor in the OR kinds of subjects, but at the same time satisfy Charlie, okay, that you can manage things. Well, and I found myself in a strange world because the folks in the industrial setting, particularly where I was migrating to more to the manufacturing side of the world, I was a great theorist. Well, on the academic side, you're really the applied, hands-on guy. What are you doing here? And
so you're probably in the middle then.
Well, and that's been my life that way exactly. That I could understand a lot of the theoretical material, and yet I was dealing by being in the company. I was forced to understand the real problems and not necessarily apply the tools I'd learned, but that way of thinking influenced me a lot. And of course, as you know better than I believe you worked for him, but before we ever met in the academic circles, I worked for Alan Pritzker. And he was really demanding, very bright, and so on. And at that point, he was really had invented and was really the creating stages of GERT networks. These are probabilistic networks, as you recall. And they became a way of thinking for me. They really characterized in a lot of ways my career. I can identify with these decision nodes where you have alternatives with probabilities, and you take some and you don't take others. And it's really a career that I've characterized in a lighthearted way as kind of the lily pad approach to planning your career. And I know the Harvard Business School and all the results say, well, if you know exactly what you're going to do and have written goals and so on, that's how you'll come out on top. That was never the case. You can tell from the background, I didn't have that in mind, but I had a number of opportunities that came along my way. So in the company, again, I was going to graduate school to get a PhD and go teach somewhere. And my intent was to be in Phoenix. It's hot there in the summer. And
So you started off as a master's, and then you continued.
Master's and PhD. Yeah, the intent was to get the PhD all along. I wanted to.
So you went straight thinking about PhD with an academic career in mind.
Yep, exactly.
And in the meantime, pick up some practical experience at Garrett.
Well, and make some money.
And make some money.
So, yeah, and it ended up being an interesting experience. One day, Alan Pritzker calls me, and I was a full-time employee there. He says, all right, have you ever considered coming to school full-time for a while? And my response was, I think you're calling the wrong person. I'm the guy that's married, got a couple kids at home now, and needy. He says, no, I know exactly who I'm calling, as you would expect. And what he actually had in line was various financial deals to where I could afford to go to school full-time for a couple of years. What I worked out with the company was something that wasn't in any of the policies, and that was to work 10 hours a week, keep my seniority and benefits intact, and then be a full-time student, and busy time. But it really worked out, again, to be a neat blend, because that's when I moved from engineering to the more the manufacturing side of the world.
Okay.
And so and that's where I developed some real mentors in the company. Early on, a fellow by the name of Fred Litterman was temporarily the manager of manufacturing, but he was a financial guy by background. So I got in that, I got to understand the finances of that division, how the accounting system worked and what it meant. And very few people outside of accounting really understood it. And you say this part cost $77.39. And you say, how did you get that? Well, you had rates that you applied and all this. Most people would say, well, that's absolute as a number. It's not. It's the number you want it to be. And you have an accounting system that really is based on cost recovery. And cost recovery, we had military and commercial customers, so it's based on what the military does, and you want to maximize that. So I came to understand exactly the nature of the business from a strange source. And I was one of the very few guys outside of accounting and quotations that ever really got to understand that. I kept probing at those kind of questions. Because this Fred Litterman was asking me to do things. And they finally said, I won't use their direct language, but, well, darn it, you're gonna keep probing and put the pieces together. Why don't we just take you through and tell you exactly how it worked? And as far as I know, I was the only person outside of accounting and quotations that ever got that introduction. And boy, that served me well. And one of the
So you were in the manufacturing role, actually being involved with the numbers, financial numbers.
Yeah.
Which kind of distinguished yourself from probably most of the other manufacturing engineers in the company who really didn't have any experience or background in some of the kind of financial background of most industrial engineers, operations researchers get involved in.
Yeah, and a very simple tool that we've talked about many times, the engineering economy.
Yep.
I remember one of your quotes. I won't use it in this interview, but I love that course, and I took it from Alan Pritzker. So needless to say, I had a rigorous course in engineering economy. And what I could do in those days was a very simple thing. I had an IBM punch card little deck, I think it was about 22 punch cards, and I could consistently put in some data, and I'd get the rate of return calculation and get it the same answer every time. And at that point, most people were doing that by hand, and they were doing some of the darndest things. So management didn't trust numbers. So here I was in my upper 20s, and all these people probably paid about 4 times what I was paid, had to come to me to get their numbers blessed. So that became kind of funny. And one time, somebody came in and referred to me as the guru of engineering economy. I said, there's no such thing. But that became a tool that served me well, a very simple tool, quantitative certainly, because you had to understand it, but it's basically high school algebra that you're involved in. And yeah, when we do it theoretically in a course, we get a little calculus involved in it, but that's not necessary. So that served me extremely well to get known in there. So then I got into this. I was in this part-time role then.
Yeah, you were doing this 10 hours a week, if I remember.
10 hours a week.
The special deal you had
Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
company.
And there was nothing in the book said you could do that, but
Right.
there were obviously one mentor up in engineering, Bob Von Flew, understood what I was telling him, and he said, well, it's a guy we'd like to keep in the company, so he did the blocking and tackling to get it done. And so I did my 10 hours a week for almost 2 years, a little short of that as it worked out.
At the end of your dissertation, working on your thesis during that period,
Yeah,
I'm assuming
that was
that's
the
when
main
it
thing.
It was, so you were
I
working.
was also teaching part-time.
Oh, so you were teaching part-time,
Te-
running your dissertation, and working 10 hours a week while raising a family.
Yeah. So I gave up golf and TV.
And everything else that goes
I
along
haven't
with it.
gotten
Yeah.
back to golf.
Yeah.
TV a little bit now that now I'm emeritus, which is my favorite part of the label. But anyway, during that time then I finished my PhD, and obviously the reason for that was to go into academe full-time, academic position. I went around the country and interviewed a number of places. I think I interviewed at 6 different places and had 5 offers. Interestingly enough, the one I didn't get I was really not a match for what I was looking for, was Wisconsin, where Jerry Nadler was. So this was '69. That's when he and I first met, and we'll talk more about him. He's certainly one of the nodes in that when I draw the Garrett network of my career. But, so I had these offers, and the highest offer was way above what I was making in the company. You hire on a bachelor's degree, and this is a normal progression. You don't keep up.
Right.
The old rule of thumb of there, every 5 years and every degree you should change companies.
Okay.
People did that and served them well. And so I went into, there was a guy named Roy Eckram, who really was probably my prime mentor in that company. He was they called it director then, manufacturing operations. Later they called it vice president of operations. But anyway, he was running that. I went into it and said, well, Roy, I'm here to tell you I'm resigning. I'm going to accept an offer from the university. Why would you do that? I said, well, that's why I did the PhD, but as an incidental, here's what they'll pay me. Oh. Next day he came back and he says, if we pay you this much, will you consider staying? In one day it was a 42% raise, which I've never heard of before or since. But it said, maybe I'll look into this. And I said, yeah, I'm your guy.
Did they in that time change your nature of your job, or was it going to be different?
Well, yeah, I really came back in, my role, most effective role in a lot of ways, was to be an advisor to management. And develop some rules there for how you run a group like that. At that point, there were all kinds of groups doing OR, MS kind of things that were advising, but they'd have to go out and sell their services and so on. There was one large one, I won't name the company, but it was in Phoenix. It had over 30 people in a OR group. And the only conversation they would have with me is, what tools are you using? And are you using quadratic programming? I said, for what? And so my orientation was always, what is the problem to solve? And then I look for the right tool, which obviously an analogy to working on cars and such. You say, well, if it's a bolt, I don't need a screwdriver, I need a ratchet wrench or whatever. And so the same thing, I find that analogy there, is that we were oriented to what the problem was. And we developed a rather neat deal. Again, when Roy created the neatest group we had, was only a handful of us, 5 of us, and we got 4 of us were PhDs. One was the smartest one out of the whole group, just had a master's, all out of ASU, and people I knew. And, well, they weren't all out of ASU. Debbie Seifert, as she was known then. I think you remember her, Nightingale now. But anyway, they were around me, and we basically got to control and change the way they thought about manufacturing there. When you get in, they had about 450, I think it was, industrial engineers and manufacturing engineers. To my knowledge, there wasn't a single degreed engineer out of that whole bunch when I came in. So I never was introduced as Dr. Settles. I was always Stan in those days, and first name, all these kind of people. But fundamentally, what we did is we controlled how you used the mainframe computer for manufacturing. Again, the tool that drove everything you did. So we changed the way they thought about that. Then during that time, Debbie was particularly good at it. We got into using simulation. So Debbie and Tom Hill and so on, the simulation in those days wasn't what it is today. You generate about 8-inch stack of paper and go into see the boss. And so it illustrates, again, a principle. We'd go in with a stack of paper, whatever high it was like that. We never had to turn a page of it because we could tell them, well, here's what this says. And so they developed a trust in people like us to, okay, they realized they didn't have that technology. We had it, and they'd listen, and we changed what happened as a result. Anyway, Roy was a very bright guy, very, and he loved being the leader. So he was an interesting character because he was so definite. And we called him Big Roy. That's because he stood about 6'6", and he was a former basketball player at University of Washington and so on, and just really fit kind of guy. And he always wore this pinstripe suit, so he looked about 7 feet tall, but he was only, as I say, about 6'5", 6'8", whatever, only. And most people, he had such a dominant personality, most people would never question him. And I was able to develop a relationship with him. I could never, always one-on-one, but typically late at night, things kind of calmed down. I on several occasions, talked to him. I said, here's something we're doing. Doesn't make any sense to me. And we'd get into, he'd really argue opposite and whatever. And I said, well, you're the boss, but that's what I think. And he never, ever agreed that I was right and it should change, but it changed.
So you were using the results of these simulation models, your
Yeah,
scientific
we were
basis
doing
as,
that.
as a basis to make change?
Yeah, we are using that to make change, but we're also using something that's unusual in OR, MS kind of application, that is common sense. To say, okay, how does this balance with what we're really doing? So my whole experience of being in the university and getting into the theoretical things, and at that time, you couldn't get the data to satisfy the models.
Yes.
And I had some people from another part of the university come out, and when I was in those kind of roles, and they wanted to optimize they wanted us to support them for research. They were going to optimize the 2-machine, 3-job shop scheduling thing. I said, well, how about the 100-machine, 600 open orders that you have to schedule every day? Oh, well, that's not even possible. I said, let's go walk. I could literally walk them about 200 or 300 feet out there. We're in the middle of a factory. Here's people, high school education, maybe, doing that every day. So give me the connection of how we get there. And of course, in those times, there was no way you could do that. Nowadays, okay, that's a piece of cake. So.
Well, back then, scalability, and it's still today, scalability is always an issue.
Oh, yeah, clearly is, and we'll get to some of that later on. But it gave me kind of a unique existence of, and I characterize, I'm always in Never Never Land. The industry people thought, boy, he's a real theoretician, academics. Why is this applied guy here? It was kind of a trade-off, but a real blessing to have that kind of background along with the reality of the company. And Roy became my mentor all along. And another guy worked for him.
Excuse me.
The interesting thing is, at a very young age, they were trying to push me into management jobs. some of the strangest conversations they weren't ready for. They were talking to me about being a department head when I was 29 years old. Would have been the youngest ever in the history of the company.
This was right after your PhD?
Yeah. And I said, I'm doing things that you don't have anybody else that can do them. Meanwhile, here are people that have been in that material department for years, particularly Les Wells. I say, he's way better at that job than I am. And so they weren't used to an answer like that. People were usually clawing to be in that. So Les went into that, and he became another of my mentors, really. Non-degreed fellow from Oklahoma, grew up on a farm out there, but he had the common sense that was just amazing, and had people skills that you learn a lot from. So those two were mentors all along in the company. And later on, I didn't get a choice. Was pushed into various management roles. And the big one came, I was running industrial and manufacturing engineering in Phoenix. I had all these engineers in the development shops and so on reporting to me. And then that's how I got to Southern California. You mentioned earlier, I got over here somehow, Torrance, California. Well, Garrett then had two major divisions. It was Garrett Air Research in Phoenix, Garrett Air Research over in Torrance. And they got into a bit of a quality system problem over there. This was 1985, and the corporation had been in there fixing things for about a year, and it wasn't getting any better. And the quality of the products was never a question, but they had a mentality that said engineering can make one of something, and that's success. And then we'll buy all of them on exception, so they'll make a judgment call on these units and say, yeah, that one's good, that one's not. Well, the rules by the DCAS military is if you buy the exception 3 times, you have to change the blueprint. They weren't doing that. And that, along with several other things, and the crowning blow was a funny one. We have DCASMA, which was the military buy-off. So as long as you have some military, you have them in control of what you do in the shop. So after we were already under a lot of surveillance, they had one of their representatives out in our Zyglo booth. He comes in, there's a nice big sign posted in there saying, no food or drink in this area. So he walks in, here's a guy there's a donut and a coffee sitting over on his side bench. Well, you can imagine what an inspector mentality does with that. He says, this is your sign. Why is this here? The guy didn't give the best answer. And I'll quote it directly. He says, none of your damn business.
Rules don't apply to me, is
Yeah.
what he's basically saying.
Well, yeah. Got to be the dumbest answer ever given.
Right.
Well, you can imagine what happened then, because everything escalated. So when I got there, to solve any kind of a quality problem, it was being solved at the level of the division president. So the company at that point had about 5,000 people in that division. So the president of all that was meeting with a general downtown from the DCAS to solve things. And so he was down there several times a week. He'd drive from Torrance downtown. Not that that's. I think the general was based at the L.A. Air Base there, but so it was only.
So really from the airport to downtown LA.
Yeah, but the division was actually headquartered down in Torrance.
I see.
At this point, we still had the manufacturing by LAX. So I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, that's what they were doing. So my role was very quickly. There was a major that was represented them on the scene for quality. We had a quality manager who happened to know he'd moved over from Phoenix some years ago before, and I'd come over from Phoenix. I didn't know the products or anything at that point. I got the three of us together and I said, every time they go down to LA to meet, we failed. What? If we can't deal with it here at our level, we have failed. So we made a point of being seen together all the time. We'd walk walk the shop together, and that's something I picked up from Les Wills, my mentor. Walk the floor. They'd never. I was a vice president of operations at that point. Brought over, wasn't what I wanted to do. They came over to consult how to fix it to start with, and then they said, "No, you stay and be the vice president." Again, one of the funniest conversation ever. No, I have a good job in Phoenix. I don't want to do that. Mm-hmm. I'm the analyst. I'm not ready to, kick tail and numbers and so on. That's not my. It finally came clear to me that what I wanted to do didn't matter. They decided I was the guy to do it. And I look back, my estimate was that little quality fiasco those 2 years cost the company something like $200 million in 1985 dollars.
We're talking real dollars.
Yeah, and those are real. And so you look at that and say, well, what I did, if you felt I could make some difference in that, you say, okay, I'll go with that. But a strange conversation again. I said, I'm not. That's not what drives me. I'm more the analyst. I prefer that in advising people. But I said, okay. So I was vice president of operations at that point. That's what.
Do you think at a vice president of operations level, you were able to get into the details of solving that quality problems, or you were able to hire the right people at that time to make that change?
Well, clearly you have to do both. Mm-hmm. I look back. I would have been more effective. I worked long hours. Cause my family was in Phoenix, and my wife and I got together each weekend. I was either in Torrance or in Arizona. That's when I first learned how to live in two places. And so I had a place in Redondo Beach there, right on the beach, and so I was over here alone. So I would spend short days for about 12 hours. A lot of times it was 15, 16 hours. I'd have been better off. I was stuck to about 8 or 10 hours, something like that, and forced more of it to be delegated when I look back. Mm-hmm. But again, my OR and MS, IE background, and I still remember a conversation I had that I'm sure went through that company real quickly. Is a guy came in and says, it looks like you used to be an engineer. I said, no, I am an engineer. This is my job now, but I am an engineer. Mm-hmm. Ooh, and when you're a vice president, everything just boom. As soon as you say something, it just. But they weren't used to seeing a vice president walk the floor over there, mm-hmm. and it was a strange feeling because that wasn't my nature either. But I knew from Les Wills that was the thing to do. One incident in all that was, at that point, our factory was right next to Terminal 1 at LAX, right across what's now a ramp there. Nowadays, it's Park 1 parking lot. Ever since I was in the company, they were determined to close that and sell the property for a hotel or some other use. And I got into there, and we literally had a factory that would not make the parts. It had been created in the 40s and hadn't been kept up. And so we were saying, gee, we have a quality problem. Well, we have a quality system problem. And most manufacturing quality problems start in engineering. They didn't like those words because they thought they were wonderful in engineering. But anyway, we got into that. Again, I met Roy. Roy at this point was then vice president, or what was his title? Sector president for aerospace. So all the Phoenix and LA operations and so on reported to him. He was still the same guy. And he was my boss's boss's boss or somewhere, and there are several people in between, so I shouldn't even been talking to him in the normal structure, but I knew him. Still remember one night, his office was up there by LAX. I went, well, Roy, you taught me in Phoenix how we can do things. If you're vice president of operations, you can work on a modernization plan of the factory. I said, in this place, we can't make the parts. There's two answers. One is to really close this down, make use of the land we have down Western Avenue, and make a deal on this property. I can't do that as manufacturing. But what I can do is set about modernizing the factory. So that's what I intend to do. Again, one of those classic deals that he never agreed that was right, but you could actually trace from that day forward, that factory was gone and was sold off. It turned out to be a parking lot. The thing that we were concerned with was environmental impact. when you built a factory in the 40s, you didn't have the same concerns.
Sure.
And now I can talk about it. I couldn't talk about it then. Right across from Terminal 1, probably 200 feet from where their
Which is the Southwest Terminal in
Well,
LAX.
yeah, and U.S. Air,
US area.
as we can now call it. But anyway, yeah, and I could actually park in my reserved spot there at the factory and walk into Terminal 1. But anyway, right across there was what we called the boom room. So we had all kinds of things that were literally explosive that was right in that area. And well, how that existed at that time, I have no idea. But things that were really, and we never had an incident and so on. And then the whole environmental cleanup ended up not being near the problem everybody anticipated. So it was a win-win, but it set that whole thing in motion again by that. So kind of some fundamental rules that came out in how a group like that worked. And I served well. Again, Roy, as we established the group, he said, you guys, here's what I want you to do. You're kind of the think tank, do things and all. He says, one rule is you can't go out and sell your services. A lot of these groups, that's what they spend their time doing. They'd spend the majority of their time selling. Okay, we can do this for you. He says, you can't do that. And me to say, oh, well, he says, I'll do the selling. I said, perfect. And rules I developed along with that is we can't take credit for what we do. You and I know what PhD engineers are like. The bulk, particularly in academia, that's the primary result. We get credit for it, we get tenure for publishing this, and that's what it's about. And if we did that with anything we did, we owned it rather than the operating people. So operating people got credit for doing things that they didn't even know happened at the time. And, oh, yeah, Max, good move. Well, Max didn't even know what was happening. But again, you had to have a boss that was that way. So and there were some fundamental rules. All of us had that kind of the OR kind of background in our set of tools. Simulation, as I commented before, is the only one we use directly.
So now that might be a good segue to discuss kind of the contributions that an OR person can do. Clearly, our profession has a list of pioneers who would say have made fundamental contributions, as you mentioned, Alan Pritzker in the field of simulation, George Danzig in the field of linear programming. What would you say have been your fundamental contributions to the operations research industrial engineering profession?
Yeah, my fundamental contribution came in the application domain. I did the research and could have gone on and got into an academic position, I think done well in the traditional way. But a better mix was this kind of in-between role. It's hard to characterize, but by applying it, letting people see the results from what we do rather than developing the tools themselves. I have a deep respect for the people that do develop the tools, the Alan Pritzkers, and you talk about the Denzing and some of these kind of people. And it's an interesting, again, it characterizes what I was, the in-between kind of role of being a theorist to one group and an applied person to others, but being able to bridge those, I think, was the main contribution. And that's what, I was very fortunate, while I was still in the industry, got elected to the National Academy of Engineering. How in the world did that happen? Well, it's about 2,000 members nationwide that are U.S. members of it. You have to be elected by them. And it's partly a competence deal, but it's really also a very much political process. You have to know the right people. So the blend was interesting. I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't campaign for it all. I didn't even hardly knew what it was. Industry people didn't know what it was. But I've later pretty much deduced who the players were behind, but it was a combination of academic folks that knew me professionally through particularly industrial engineering profession, and also people in the company that were members of the NE. You have to be nominated by members and endorsed by them. And I think I've got it figured out who they were, some names that you and I would both recognize, but I wouldn't say it. I'm not supposed to know, but I deduce from that. But it was, again, the combination is what led to that. I had the advantage of being from industry at that point, so it's easier to get elected there for very simply because they seek a pretty much a 50-50 balance between academe and industry, and there's all kinds of rewards in academe for being elected to that, as you and I know. Industry doesn't even know what it is. So I literally, I didn't know what it was when I got the letter. I can still remember exactly where I was standing in my house in Tempe, and I got this letter. I think I know I think I can figure this out. That's pretty neat.
What was the reaction? Did you bring it back to Garrett? What was their reaction when you said, I just got elected as the National Academy of Engineering for my contributions here at the company applying operations research?
Well, I could get their attention a little bit because there were significant people in the company that were NAE members. Mary Good was from the chemical side of it. Normally, somebody in the turbine business wouldn't even know her, but they had these technology meetings, and for some strange reason, she and I became pretty good friends out of that because she was really neat. She was particularly into ceramics at that point, and so everyone was saying how ceramics wouldn't work in turbo machinery because they were fragile and they'd break and all. And she could just, it'd be a meeting of 200-300 people, this technology meeting. She'd speak up and say, well, you have a paradigm of designing for metals, and does that need to change? And so you could just hear a pin drop in the whole thing. And I was one that, for some reason, we became pretty good friends. John Mason was a member, and he was the chief engineer for Garrett. And again, he and I became friends through various roles I had. And so for people like that, it was meaningful. My boss at the time was Mal Craig, who was one of the really neat guys I worked for. He was a West Point graduate and really a marketing kind of guy. And I had a role. I was director of planning for that division, which nobody knew what a director of planning did. They created it to that point, this corporate structure. Said, we need one of those in each of these major divisions. I said, well, what do they do? And he said, we don't know. Meanwhile, I was in Torrance, and I said, Mal was back in Phoenix. I said, I'm coming there. And this was after we became a part of what now is Honeywell, was Allied Signal, headquartered in Morristown, New Jersey. So again, Big Roy had me lined up to go interview back there as what would have been a corporate either vice president or director for planning at what's now Honeywell. And I visited New Jersey for a couple of days. And I said, not for me. And again, the corporate life at that level is just so remote. I just said, no, it was a whole new setting. I just come back from that trip, and that's when Mal Craig called me over in Torrance, and he said, well, here's what we're doing. We don't know what it does, but each of us have to have one. So I'm your guy, Mal. So that's when I went back to Phoenix then, and ended up in really an interesting role because he was a salesman and so on. He was the boss. He was the president of this division. At that point, about 6,000, 7,000 people, something like that. Big business. And he needed this director of planning, but I was a manufacturing guy doing that. And I got into things, talking about mergers and things like that with him because I had that manufacturing background, and I was the only guy cleared. At that time, we were talking about merging the businesses of the small engine business with, well, I can say it now, it's GE. And we were very secretly meeting with the people from Lynn, Massachusetts, and so on. Vice President of Operations didn't even know what was going on. He wasn't cleared. So you develop the trust and you develop the way of logic. Did that involve OR? No, it involved forecasting quantitative things, but not that. So
it seems that your fundamental contributions at the company, which led to the NAE, was this application of the tools into this advanced manufacturing setting.
Yeah.
So I kind of like to have the views now at this time between the trade-off between tool development and the application of such tools, and what's your viewpoint on that?
Well, again, I commented before, I have a deep respect for the people that develop a tool. Some people think, well, as an applied guy, you don't. I have a deep respect for that. I think the tools need to continually improve, but you need the common sense that also says as they're improving, how can I use them? Again, back to the quadratic programming deal that group was talking about, and they were just enthralled with the tools. They were gone within a little over a year, but understanding what you can use and can't use, and where you can get the data, it's a balancing act that you can't, in a lot of ways, you can't quantify, but you need to have the understanding of what's coming along in the tools, and the tools, of course, since those days have gotten way better. Mm-hmm.
So this might be a good time to talk, because we've been using the term industrial engineering and operations research kind of interchangeably, but they're quite distinct professions. I mean, there are operations researchers in IE departments, and there's operations researchers in, say, business schools, even math departments. And what's your viewpoint? And can you see a clear distinction between these two fields?
No, I really see them blurring. They're clearly the specialty. The OR, one person's definition of OR is not always consistent with others. Some of them think it's strictly the very theoretical development. Other people would say, well, okay, linear programming, that's OR. And others say, oh, that's not. I find that those definitions aren't necessarily helpful to me. And I find industrial engineering, management science, OR, and even systems engineering, that there's a blurring there, and you somehow have to, whatever you call it, make it make sense for the setting you're in. My transition, after I'd been in the company 30 years, got an opportunity to retire early. Back in 1992, I was going to retire when I turned 55, a couple years later anyway, and there was a big slowdown, so there was a good opportunity to get out with the same financial package as if I'd stayed 2 years later. I said, well, goodbye. That's when I went to Washington. I was officially on the faculty at ASU, and simultaneously I was involved in the National Science Foundation and the White House OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy. So now I was in.
Who was the president at that time?
I was in at the end of the Bush administration and the first, first couple months of the Clinton administration.
Okay.
So I was there in a transition, so-called, which is not a transition at all. It's close one set of books and throw it all away. And you people have been following up for 12 years. We don't care what you did. That was a direct quote. The guy that said that he was a presidential appointee that succeeded Gene Wong, who's the guy I worked for in OSTP. He lasted barely over a year because he just didn't measure up. But it was a fantastic opportunity again. And whether you characterize it as OR or not, I think the background that way really did fit in. But I was unique again. We had all these various committees studying cross-cutting activity there, and they were doing doing things that had to do with industry. Again, interestingly enough, automotive kind of things. Next generation program was going on, and here was these committees that were people within the Beltway, and out of all of them there, I was the only guy that had ever worked a day in industry. So it was just really a phenomenal existence.
And they were coming from either full-time government jobs or full-time academic jobs?
Both.
Yeah.
Most of them were full-time government jobs. Mm-hmm. And so they were in the Beltway, and they were used to the mentality that we're in the Beltway, we know the answer, and we'll specify it. And when I got there, the plan on that was to actually specify the next generation motor vehicle in Washington, and it was going to be lead-acid batteries, electric motors of the 1992 generation. Again, the systems thinking, as I call it, you can call it OR, but we didn't have the tools at that point. I started asking. I was there only 2 weeks, and meeting with this committee, I asked the question, has anybody thought about the whole system? The obvious question, lead-acid batteries, and you're recycling all this, and you have to generate the power somewhere.
Yeah.
You got the emissions there. Has anybody thought about the whole system? And this room was about 35 people in that room. And they didn't know. I was brand new there, so they didn't know. They knew I was from the White House, but they weren't sure exactly where I fit in. Room went absolutely silent. Finally, one guy in the back of the room said, yeah, we've thought about it. We don't know how to answer it. again, I've only been there about a couple of weeks. Interesting that if you ask the right question, you don't have to answer it.
Sure.
If I'd have been there a little longer, and particularly with what we know now, if we're a White House committee and we can't either answer it ourselves or can't figure out how to fund somebody to get us an answer, who can? All these alternatives started bubbling up. Things that had been squashed because that was the answer. All of a sudden, clean diesels. Well, we know we have clean diesels now that are
Sure.
all kinds of things, and inadvertently it led to hybrids. And I think my role in it got us in that direction at least a year earlier, maybe more.
This is in the role of being in the Office of the Science, Technology, and
OSTP, yeah, at the same time I was also an NSF program officer.
right.
And so I knew the director of NSF well, and of course the assistant director for engineering, Joe Bordogna, knew him real well, and Gene Wong, and so the combination of those two, plus being a member of the National Academy, really, I was a neat role, and I didn't actually pursue that enough from an OR standpoint. I look back, there's always regrets. Any of these branches you take, you say, what would happen if I'd have done others? But that was one where if we, particularly with the tools we now have of modeling, you'd say, gee, we can do better. It's still a really hard problem to deal with. You start the latest one. I can't verify the research on it, but if you take a Prius and a Hummer and say which one is overall more friendly to the environment, it turns out to be the Hummer. One study did. I can't. I've never gotten to the core of it, but it says
That's a very interesting finding.
well, but again, when you think of a Prius, or I now own I shouldn't say I own, my dear wife of 54 years owns a Lexus hybrid. And when you start looking at what is involved with that lithium ion battery and all that, and so on, the overall environmental impact is different than just the gas mileage.
Sure.
Yeah, it gets phenomenal gas mileage, whatever it is,
Right.
but it's so. Anyway, the thinking in that domain was kind of funny. It was a neat opportunity. I was only there 2 years, but at one point I counted up. I was wearing about 9 different hats because I was so unique. Out of 1,000 program officer kind of people at NSF, I was the only one with industry experience that I know of real industry. Same thing with the OSTP part. So we'd sit on the PCAS, which is the President's Advisors on Science and Technology, and sit in those meetings. We weren't participants, but some of them I knew. That Mary Good, that was from the company, was a member of that. So it was a continuum. Really interesting role for 2 years, and I could have stayed there, particularly the NSF part. I could have stayed longer. Once the Clinton administration was there, I was, as I said, about 2 months, because nobody ever said you're gone. It just wasn't that as interesting, so I just started going to the other office. In ways, it was the most fun part, though. Gordon Moore and the semiconductor industry people came to visit the White House. I was their host during that time. Spent half a day with him, and didn't know that much about him. But just a neat experience to have seen somebody like it firsthand and realize that, hey, it was just like your neighbor. He's just a really neat guy, worth all these billions of dollars, and one of the great creative minds of that industry. But you'd have never guessed it in that meeting. Just a neat guy. So that was a fun tour of duty. Then
So that's kind of like, in some ways now, you finished career 1, captain of industry, vice president at Garrett, 2 years at phase 2, which is basically in a high-level position in the Office of Science, Technology, and also your NSF program. Now you're beginning your phase 3, which obviously
then I was wrapping up there, and I could have stayed, particularly at NSF. I could have stayed on there longer, whatever. I was just a rotator from ASU there when I was there, so that's how you get paid more. But I could have stayed either in that role or become a federal employee, and I really enjoyed that. I wasn't a researcher, but I got to understand the research community pretty well, and gave a flavor to it that I think was unique. But anyway, at that point I said, yeah, family's out west. I want to go back. And there were probably 15 different universities that expressed interest in me. Most of them in the southeast, and I didn't even consider them. I didn't want. It really came down to two: ASU and USC. And Jerry Nadler had first contacted me when I was in the company back in 1985. I have written correspondence from him. He was trying to get me to consider come here to be on the faculty, and I didn't do that. Obviously, that's when I was in the roll down Torrance, and so then when I was getting ready to leave, it came down to really those two, and again, Jerry Nadler was behind it. Jerry Fleischer, who was a faculty member, contacted me. And so then my wife, in her usual manner, says, those people have been talking to you for about 10 years. Why don't you make up a decision, either do it or not? Okay? So I explored it and came out and looked at it. And again, it was sort of like when I got the vice president job in Mentorship. They didn't tell you everything up front. That down there, they had fired the purchasing manager the week before I came in as vice president. And then, oh, by the way, we fired him. We had to fire 19 other people for conflict of interest. But anyway, when I got here, we're down to 3 full-time faculty, which I knew that was about the case. But I also found that I was being interviewed by people all over the campus. Why is this? Well, it turns out, as you know, there was a committee studying whether we do away with the department. It was down to 3. It had been up to around 10 faculty and come down to 3. One is right here and had observed all of it, and Baroque, who's still here, and Jerry Fleischer. And Jerry's, of course, retired since then, but the memo said if in fact me by name didn't accept the job, it would go to be folded into mechanical engineering. They didn't tell me that up front. Here's what's going on. I got in, finally ended up with a copy of that, and
Surprise, surprise, right?
yeah, well, yeah. Again, it was similar. Okay, I said, So then, Len Silverman was the dean then. So it was kind of funny that ASU, what they now is the Polytechnic campus, they call it, it's out east, and it's more of the hands-on kind of thing that a lot of ways fit me better than a research university. And it was just starting, and I would have been. The guy that was the dean of that at the point was a guy I knew quite well. He happened to go to the same church in Tempe and all, and really smart guy, but a guy you could trust. But there had been one guy in between us, and I couldn't see how that would work. And it was not a tenure track position either. So then I started talking over here. Strange conversations. Leonard offered me a job. If I'd agreed to be here at least 5 years, but initially offered without tenure. So tenure for its own sake doesn't matter to me. My simple question is, how do you deal with making tenure appointments and recommendations and so on without having tenure yourself? I still remember about a week later, David D'Argenio gives me a call and he says, well, would you accept the same offer with tenure? I said, I think I'll do that. But times were different, obviously, because at that point I was coming in, I was granted tenure coming in, I was a department chair because of the need, and I had 0 refereed publications. Yeah, today you'd say what? University of this status. And I didn't know that much about USC, to be honest. I knew it was respected, mainly as a football power, like everyone still does. And I didn't even realize it was a private institution, which a lot of people don't. I characterize it kind of peeling the onion. You come back and say, wow, what a neat opportunity. So then I signed up to be there 5 years. I was here 21. And that ended up, obviously, it said with my feet what it was important. It was a neat opportunity. And
so what do you think some of the things you brought unique you mentioned that you had 0 publications, but there was obviously something about your background that made USC to make the decision to hire you as department chair. What do you think what was unique about your perspective that you brought to the department?
Well,
to,
yeah,
to,
I was really brought in for the leadership to try and help be the leader to bring it back. As you know, we were threatened for our accreditation. Before that, we'd had a show cause even, and never had a full accreditation. And so the dean was looking at how do we get the leadership in the department. He wasn't looking for me to be the leader in the research domain, because that wasn't what I demonstrated. So it again fit my background to say, I don't need the publications, I don't need the funding for summers. That just messes up my time. But as long as I was, as you recall, when I was a department chair, I was there. I was used to, a job was full time. You were there 5 days a week, and that's what I was doing in those years. And again, we got the right people. We had the neat opportunity. We added Randy Hall, Diane Bailey, and myself all at the same time. And two of us stayed long term. Randy clearly very successful, vice president of research and all. And so we had a core now that grew to, I don't know, the present count is something like 15 to 18 full-time equivalent. And that's a rather neat story to say, well, we started from that base and grew. And not just the numbers, but I think the quality has come along. We've added, again, very heavily in the OR side. I think I like to get the balance that says you need all these kinds of things, including human factors, which was never my particular area of expertise. I had a sensitivity to it. Do you need more of the management kind of focus? You need the OR, MS, what do you want to call it? I think to be a great department, and I think that's a struggle, but it's.
What do you think you brought in the first few years to really make the fundamental shift to get to the department where it was at 3 to what you say now to 15, 18 people? What do you think were some of the things that you did the first few years to make and drive that change?
Well, I almost go back to I can't fully describe my approach. I had one guy that worked for me in industry, and he was down a couple levels from me, but he says, I've been watching you and how you manage. He says, I don't understand your approach to management, but you seem to muck around in things and they get better. and that's kind of what I characterize. It's a common sense thing, again, that you get back to, and you take it a step at a time. And some of the steps, it sounds so easy now, if you look back. But you and I know rather well it wasn't easy. We absorbed people from ISSM. Well, those first few years, I spent a great deal of time on that, because they initially wanted to put about a dozen people. We were about 6 people, and they wanted to put all of them in our department. Well, as one of our former colleagues said, he says, that's insane. We're going to vote to bring in a new majority to our department. And that simple line I used with the vice provost at that time was coordinating it all. So I got to know the provost, vice provost, and all these people as a result of that, trying to figure out what they do with ISSM. And it wasn't an academic thing, it was an economic thing. It got to where it wasn't profitable. So it was a logical link for engineering or management and the business school. And neither of them wanted it because it wasn't making money. Mm-hmm. And so that's what really destroyed it. It was a pretty neat operation for what they did. I still run into people that were quite proud of that background. But rather than absorb all of them, we ended up with some that did come over. Some of them were part-time. That's where we had Ralph Keeney at part-time, with one of the real scholars in the country in that domain. And so that, taking those a step at a time and dealing with them, and we had to deal, and they were compromises. They sound easy now. If you go back to the discussions we had at the time, who would you accept? What offers would you make? And you're making deals. And I recall very much, Len was the dean. He'd give me orders to, you got to go do this with the faculty. The faculty would say, you got to do this with the dean. And I'd have to sort that out. And you have to sort, well, what do I go forward with, and what do I pass on down? And there were things he told me to go do that I just didn't do them. And the faculty would have just rebelled if we tried to, in my opinion. So that's a risk you take, but also developed a relationship with Len that was really unique. And,
So it sounds like in all these roles that you played, from industry to government to academic, is that job one was getting to know the people and getting to know what motivates them and gets them to do and work as a team together to a common goal. And at the same time having good judgment and instincts to know when to do what you're supposed to be doing and when you're supposed to.
I think that's a good characterization of it. And obviously I've had things that weren't the right answer, and there were paths that I could have taken. I have no idea what they would have led to, but yeah, that characterized by and large that somehow the collection of those decisions worked that direction and served me well in all those directions, and but in all three arenas: the industry, government, and academia. So, kind of fun.
So it sounds like a very exciting and rewarding career. Do you have any last thoughts or suggestions you could give to brand new operations researchers and industrial engineers as they embark on their career?
Yeah, I kind of fell into it, but I think one of the key things is sort out, if you can, the right mentors in whatever organization you're in. Faculty, we have various mentoring things that sometimes are token deals. Others become very, very serious ones. That you're associated with the right senior professor that helps guide your research as a assistant prof, and that alliance helps a lot. In industry, the same kind of thing. But I fell into it. I didn't necessarily pick them. They picked me. And again, in this context, the OR, MS, IE kind of skills singled me out, that I could do some things that nobody else in that operations could do. And so that's what led to having really, the whole time I was in the company, I had three primary mentors that I mentioned: Roy Eckram, Les Wills, and Mal Craig. And two of them have since passed away, and I'm still in contact with Mal Craig. But I happened into those. I didn't go seeking them, but the situation just really led there. So if you can do that, if you can find the right students to work with in the academic setting, that you get the bright students that can do the kinds of things where it's a win-win, and they go on and are successful. I think that's the most fun in the academic career. What do those people do? And I even see that we're still involved through the church tutoring people. I tutor algebra. I've done everything from kind of high school juniors to college people. I still do that because very few people can deal even with algebra. We think, hey, that's basic building block. And so that's some of the most fun as you look back. And a kid I tutored in our program there in Long Beach, in a whole setting where people rarely graduated from high school, he just graduated from college. But he was a kid I worked with way back when he was in elementary school, and you planted seeds. You're college material, and he was, and he did well.
So in some sense, you've changed from these, as you mentioned, these three people that were mentors. Now you're basically at this stage playing the other role of a mentor.
Yes.
To people, not just in the professional world, but also in your everyday life that you meet in your church, organizations, or whatever organization you are part of.
Yeah, we found that as really true. I look back, I never thought of myself as a mentor, but those kind of words were used as I was retiring here, and particularly with our church there in Long Beach and the activities there. There's a lot of ways more attachment there than the university, because we got so deeply involved in that these kids and what you're making a difference in their lives. So that's kind of fun.
Right. So it sounds like developing unique skill sets, and I think the key thing is, right, one doesn't go about grabbing a mentor, but grabbing that opportunity when it's there for you, right? When you see
Yeah.
someone who's willing to be your mentor, grab it, seize it, and,
Right.
and use it to
Yeah.
in your career as you
Yeah,
progress.
I think that's well said.
And it seems
Yeah.
like you've done very
It's-
well following those simple principles
Yeah.
in your career.
Yeah, I was
And,
truly blessed, and blessed with a good family, a wife of 54 years, and 4 kids, 14 grandchildren, 1 great-grandchild now. So we're having fun, and it's a neat stage of life. So
well, in that case, I will thank you.
okay,
for
well,
spending some
I
time
thank you
chatting
for
this.
taking your time to do this.
Oh, no, it was our
That's-
pleasure.